I first suspected that I had ADHD round about 2010. I had joined a study group to learn more about ADHD to help to support some clients that I had that were diagnosed, and it all sounded very familiar. I asked a friend of mine who was a social worker if she had any resources on getting diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and then promptly didn't do anything with the information she gave me. Fast forward about 11 years when I finally bring it up to my primary care doctor at my annual physical, and she gives me a list of resources in our area for me to compare to what my insurance covers. And I sat on that information for about 2 years. It really wasn't until my son got his diagnosis that I realized I needed to take my mental health seriously and finally follow through and get a diagnosis for myself. So I know firsthand how difficult it can be to follow through and actually get a diagnosis for ADHD or for any mental health issue that you might be having. And that's why today I wanted to discuss why you might seek an ADHD diagnosis, how to know when to seek a diagnosis, and then what that process might look like for you. All of that on today's episode of the ADHD Mompreneur. Does it feel like all of a sudden everyone has ADHD? Are you reluctant to seek a diagnosis because you're afraid of stigma around mental health or because it might seem like you're bandwagon jumping? I totally get that. In fact, one of the reasons I put off my diagnosis for years was that I was afraid of the label that you get with a mental health diagnosis. Or maybe you've put it off because there are just so darn many steps to get the diagnosis, so many hoops that you have to jump through, and it is completely exhausting. I have felt every single one of these feelings too, but I will add that once I finally had an answer for why I was feeling the way that I was feeling, I felt like a massive weight was lifted off of my shoulders. And that is why I wanted to discuss ADHD diagnosis with you today. But before we dive into ADHD specifically, let's talk a little bit just about mental health diagnosis in general. I received a comment on my video last week, and this particular commenter said that she had gone through the steps to get an ADHD diagnosis, but she just hadn't done the final step of going in and meeting with the person that would tell her exactly what was going on. And part of it was she was afraid that it wouldn't be ADHD, and what would that mean for her? Here's the thing. When you work with a mental health professional, they are going to be able to create a treatment plan for whatever it is that you are experiencing, whether it's ADHD or not. These mental health professionals want to help you feel better. So if you are feeling like things are off, whether it's that you have ADHD or whether it's something else, seek the help of a professional so that you can start a treatment plan and start feeling better. So back to today's topic, let's start with why you would want to seek an ADHD diagnosis. I read a pretty interesting study from 2019 that compared the quality of life for people that had ADHD symptoms versus people that had an official ADHD diagnosis. And I'll be sure to link to that study down below in the show notes if you want to read it for yourself. According to this study, people with an official ADHD diagnosis had better functional performance, better work-related productivity, a higher quality of life in general, and typically higher self-esteem. Now, this isn't to say that an ADHD diagnosis is some sort of magic bullet that's going to all of a sudden make all of your problems go away. But what it does do is it gets the ball rolling on a treatment plan for you. It helps to establish coping strategies, and it also helps you to better understand how your brain operates so that you can then share that with other people in your life so they can understand you better too. But how do you know when it is that you should seek a diagnosis? First, as I said earlier, if things are feeling off, if you're not feeling like yourself or you don't feel good, seek the help of a mental health professional, whether it is ADHD or something else. But what should you do if you don't necessarily feel like you're struggling? If you just kind of feel like things could be better? Well, if you resonated with any of the symptoms that we talked about for the last 2 weeks, or maybe you've taken an online quiz that has shown that you might have some ADHD symptoms, it may be time for you to bring it up to your family doctor on the next visit. You may also want to seek a diagnosis if you are experiencing symptoms, but there is also someone else in your family that you notice these symptoms in, like Allison from my community who left me this voicemail this week.
Hey, Christy. My ADHD diagnosis actually really came from observing behaviors in my daughter. So, as a kid growing up, that I never even thought I had ADHD, never even crossed my mind. And then now, as an adult, having children of my own, I think it was right around my daughter when she was like 4, 5, 6 years old, just started noticing some behaviors in her that were very similar to me as a child. And being an adult with the resources and access to knowledge that I have, just started doing a lot of my own research and kind of discovering what some of these behaviors, what their source might be from, and just ways that I could help her. So it really came at a way for me to serve my daughter and help her. And then through that, started learning and understanding a little bit more about ADHD and how it presents in young girls and women. And obviously those behaviors being very, very different a lot of times than how we typically think of ADHD being this sort of hyperactive, can't sit still, always getting into trouble kind of thing.
And as I said before, my son's official diagnosis really was the final straw for me seeking my own diagnosis. But what did the process look like of getting an ADHD diagnosis? I'll start with my son's process, which involved an assessment from his teachers, an assessment from us, a lengthy meeting with the doctor to review the results of the assessment, and then finally a diagnosis. Pretty early on in his kindergarten year, we noticed that he was having a lot of trouble with follow-through, high distractibility, having trouble focusing, and just kind of generally bouncing off the walls at times. But alas, this was 2020, and with the state of the world as it was, we weren't really able to start the diagnosing process with his teacher like we would have liked. So fast forward to his second grade year, and about a month into the school year, we decide to start the assessment process again. And we give the assessment to his teacher, and it comes back seeing something completely different than what we were seeing at home. No distractibility, no behavioral issues. And we were like, okay, well, maybe we're wrong about this. We now realize that there was probably a bit of masking going on because it was the beginning of the school year. It was a new teacher. He didn't want to get in trouble. But as the year would progress and we went to our mid-year conference, the teacher asked if he could have another crack at the assessment because there were some things that he was seeing in class that concerned him. There were some behavior issues, he was struggling to complete his work, and in general, his teacher thought that he was having trouble organizing his thoughts. I wanted to include this part of the story because it speaks to the idea of continuing to seek answers when you think something might be off, rather than just accepting things at the first glance and being like, well, they said he isn't having issues, so he must not be having issues. We continued to seek answers, and because of that, we were able to finally get a diagnosis and start with a treatment plan to help him. And now he is thriving. For me, I started with my primary care physician, who, as I said before, gave me a list of her recommended local resources that specialized in adult ADHD. I do recommend, if you are an adult that is seeking a diagnosis, that you look for somebody who does specialize in adult ADHD because it does present a little bit differently. And for many years, we sort of treated it as something that only occurred in kids. Obviously, with new research, we've started to notice that ADHD does persist into adulthood. It just might show up in a little bit different ways. So if there is somebody that specifies in adult ADHD, you may want to look for them. Otherwise, any therapist or psychologist or diagnosing professional should be able to get you the information that you need. So once I finally got my butt in gear after 2 years of having this information, I compared who she recommended with who was covered on my insurance, because here in the United States, not all places are covered with your health insurance. So I wanted to make sure that whoever I decided to go with would be covered, just so that I didn't incur any additional bills along the way. When I did finally book my assessment, it was about 6 weeks from the day I booked. And they sent me an assessment to fill out prior to my appointment that covered my background, my behaviors, my family history, my mental health history. And then I was to turn that in about a week before my appointment so that the person doing my evaluation would have some idea going in what my background was. On the day of my assessment, I met with my therapist and she asked me additional questions about my life and my behavior, just so that she could get a really good picture of what I was feeling and what was going on before she made her final determination. So that is my take on why you might want to seek an ADHD diagnosis, how to know when to seek it out, and what the process looked like for me as a parent and me as a patient. And I do want to restate, if you feel like something is off with your mental health for any reason whatsoever, seek help. There are people out there who want you to live the best life that you can. A mental health professional can work with you to create a treatment plan that you feel comfortable with that might include coping strategies or talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or medications or any combination of these and other strategies. And if you feel like you are ready to seek an ADHD diagnosis, here are the next steps that I would recommend. And I would recommend making a checklist because it's gonna feel like it's a lot. And I totally get that because that's part of the reason why I put mine off for so long. But if you make a checklist, if you schedule specific time to do the steps on the checklist, and then maybe even find some accountability, a friend or a spouse that can check in on you and say, hey, Christy, I know that you were looking to get a diagnosis for ADHD or something that's going on with your mental health. How are you doing in that process? First, you may want to check with your health insurance to see what they cover in terms of mental health. Typically, ADHD assessment and treatment is covered under most insurance plans, but that's not necessarily always true. So you just want to kind of know in advance what is covered. And I'm hoping that that won't create any resistance to you seeking a diagnosis or treatment, because even if it's not covered by your insurance or it's not covered well by your insurance, there are people out there and programs out there that are designed to help you get the mental health support that you need, even if it can't be covered by your insurance. Next, have a talk with your family doctor. Chances are they probably know you pretty well if you've been seeing them for several years, and they will be able to guide you in the right direction. Plus, they've probably had clients that have also sought some sort of mental health assessment, and they'll be a good source of resources and references of where you should seek your assessment. Once you get the recommendations, take a look at your insurance and see if the people that are on list A coordinate with the people that are on list B, in case it is that you want to make sure that things are covered by your insurance. And then once you've decided on a provider, make the call as soon as possible. Again, I know firsthand what it's like to sit on the information for way too long. And since my diagnosis was such an eye-opener and such a weight that lifted off my shoulder, I don't want you to make the same mistake that I did in waiting far too long to finally follow through. And if your particular diagnoser has any form of self-assessment that you need to do, or any sort of paperwork that needs to be filled out, put it on your calendar and make it an appointment to do that so you don't forget or it doesn't get lost in the shuffle of your crazy busy life. You may even want to bring back in that accountability again so that somebody can follow up with you and say, hey, Christy, I know that you made that appointment. Did you get the paperwork that they sent you filled out yet? So that's it for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen or watch this episode of the ADHD Mompreneur. I'll be back next week to discuss ADHD burnout. We'll discuss what it looks like, how to recover from it, and how to prevent it. So make sure that you are following or subscribe to me so that you don't miss an episode of the ADHD Mompreneur. If you're a business owning mom with ADHD, you're gonna need to grab my free customizable essential checklists for ADHD mompreneurs by visiting bit.ly/checklists for ADHD mompreneurs or by following the link in the episode description. Do it now before you forget. Until next time,